Wowie, wow. Critical Role. What an insane roller coaster. Hello, you beautiful people. I am Finn. Welcome back to Finn Films. For those of you unfamiliar with my channel or my content, I am a bit of a nerd. Here on this channel, I talk about all sorts of nerdy online topics, from video games to anime to my favorite shows, as well as a fantasy series like Dungeons and Dragons and my all-time favorite D&D live campaign series, Critical Role. I'm a massive Critical Role fan. I've literally been following these guys for day one for 10 years now. Wow, that's crazy to think about that. It's been 10 years since Critical Role's debut. The amount of things that have happened in my life that Critical Role has been a consistent part of is absolutely insane. I've just finished watching Critical Role Campaign 3, episode 118, one of the most wild episodes of Critical Role I've seen in a long time, and man, I'm just absolutely I'm speechless, guys. Campaign 3 really has been a kind of wild roller coaster. It feels like this campaign has been going on forever now. I think a large part of that was due to, the fact that this campaign started and then COVID hit, as well as the several breaks that the campaign has taken for miniseries such as the EXU Calamity series, and which is absolutely fantastic, by the way, and all of the other content that Critical Role has produced and started making that's different from their normal, 5e Dungeons and Dragons game over the last couple of years. Now, though, we are truly winding down for the last few episodes of Critical Role Campaign 3, with my guess being that Campaign 3 episode 120 in the next couple of weeks will likely be the finale, the last episode of Critical Role Campaign 3. However, knowing Matt Mercer and our other, party of nerdy-ass voice actors and how absolutely chaotic they are, there's really no way to predict just how exactly Campaign 3, or when exactly Campaign 3 will end, let alone how it's going to end. In this video, I just want to give my thoughts about Critical Role Campaign 3 so far, as well as talk about the most recent episode, Critical Role Campaign 3, episode 118. So, if you are not caught up on Campaign 3, consider yourself warned in terms of spoilers. So, wow. Campaign 3, episode 118. What a roller coaster. A 5-hour long ride where possibly we got the last major battle, with our major big bad evil guy, Ludinus Delath, the man that has been planning to release the god-eating entity Predathos, the mystery of Ruidus that we've watched play out over the last couple of years. It's finally come to an end with our party managing to defeat Ludinus, and what I have to say was a rather somewhat underwhelming battle. Lucky for me, I don't really watch Critical Role for the combat scenes, because D&D 5e content is relatively pretty boring, even though Matt does his best to spice it up. No, what I watch it for is the absolutely amazing storytelling and the acting that comes from our awesome group of cast of characters and Matt Mercer's amazing storytelling ability as a DM. Campaign 3 really has been this kind of crazy ride full of all sorts of twists and turns, this long-term story being told at its best. I've made several videos about this. I've done a lot of Critical Role content on my channel over the last couple of years, but I've made several videos talking about how Campaign 3 is a really amazing example of long-term storytelling at its best, a story that's been 10 plus years in the making, a story that needed Campaigns 1 and 2, as well as the miniseries EXU Calamity, in order to really grasp the greater story that is being told here, the story of the gods, the story of the origins of Exandria, the gods being chased here by this god-killing, god-eating entity, Predathos, from the far-off universe of, just in the stars, this star-like being, a star child, almost, and just really this kind of interesting twist of a story on like classic D&D fantasy gods, the role of the gods, the role of like good and evil. Matt Mercer really kind of taking this idea of like classic good and evil, especially in like a D&D fantasy sense, and really turning it on its head, especially with a character like Ludinus Delath. Now, we need to say that Ludinus Delath is likely not dead, as we saw from the end of the combat in Campaign 3, episode 118, when Ludinus's body vanished, and we learned that the staff that Ludinus was holding was kind of amplifier to possibly, make Ludinus' soul be reborn in a simulacra, a clone of some type. I mean, my dude is a wizard that's lived for hundreds and hundreds of years since the Calamity, so it's very unlikely that my dude's just gonna die like that. Ludinus, though, as a villain, is a very interesting character in the fact that I think that personally his justification for wanting to release the Predathos to devour the gods is pretty justified, especially when you look at his backstory and just just the story of the gods through his lens. Really, Ludinus's story and his, his kind of history with the gods, and as we've learned through the EXU series, the actions of the gods in the Calamity really is kind of an eye-opener to how the gods function in a world like Exandria in Critical Role. The fact that the gods are not these all-powerful, perfect beings. They are very similar to the mortals that they have created, in that they are infallible, in that they are fallible. They are, they are moral creatures that don't always make the right decisions. And at the end of the day, they seem to value their own self-perseverance among anything else. But as we've learned through the cast's interactions with the Raven Queen and the Archheart and several other gods, that having lived this long, it seems like a lot of the gods are slowly starting to change how they view themselves, their roles on Exandria, and even their roles as kind of people, as beings. I feel like I'm kind of in the minority of the Critical Role fan base, where I'm actually super sympathetic to Ludinus, and I don't even think the outcome that he was trying to achieve would necessarily been a bad one. If hypothetically he would have released Predathos, or if, maybe Predathos still gets released via Fern or Imogen in the next couple of episodes and does devour the gods and then goes upon its way, now we have a world of Exandria where there are just mortals. There are no divine beings. But we know that there is still divine magic. Divine magic is possible, possibly through the Luxum, a being that's even older than the gods, a being that seemingly inhabited Exandria and brought life to Exandria well before the gods even got there, as we learned through a character like Xerxes from EXU Calamity, that it is possible for, mortals to use divine magic without being linked to a god. So then it does seem completely possible that the world of Exandria, the world of the mortals, would continue on relatively unchanged to some degree should the gods be eaten and just disappear from Exandria for the future of the Critical Role campaigns. This campaign has been really interesting compared to the other two campaigns that have finished so far, campaigns 1 and 2, and that this campaign really does have a potential drastic impact for the future of Exandria in the Critical Role universe, specifically for the future of campaign 4, assuming that campaign 4 will take place in Exandria and will be some kind of a time skip in the future. The actions that Bell's Hells take in Campaign 3 in the next couple of episodes are drastically going to impact the future of Critical Role, the universe, the world, and the stories that will be told as we know it. If we look back at how Campaigns 1 and 2 ended, little spoiler alert, but I'm assuming if you've watched this far in the video, you probably have watched the ends of Campaign 1 and 2. Campaign 3 seems to be taking a much different direction for how those other two campaigns ended. Obviously, Campaign 1 ended with the big Vecna fight, defeating a evil, being that ascended to godhood and basically was the only god on the prime material plane. Obviously, this greatly impacting and changing Exandria. Campaign 2 ended with the Mighty Nine venturing into the Astral Sea to defeat the Eyes of Nine, the Somnovan, a group of ancient Aeor mages that, bamped out of Aeor during the Calamity and the fall of Aeor, as we saw in the Fall of Aeor EXU Calamity miniseries. These mages becoming kind of warped, if you will, and just being a bunch of really bad guys. These two campaigns definitively ended here with, big major boss battles in a kind of, video game sense. You have your big major boss, the big bad evil guy at the end of the road that was defeated, and then the campaign was over. There was obviously fallout that happened from that and the stories that were told, a bunch of loose ends that were wrapped up, but essentially these two major fights, at Vecna fight, which was super epic at the end of Campaign 1, and then the Somnovan fight, were the end moments for Campaigns 1 and 2. Campaign 3, though, doesn't seem like it's going to be like that. Again, in episode 118 of Campaign 3, the most recent episode at the time of recording, we just watched the party defeat Ludinus Delath, a character that has been painted to be the big bad evil guy over the course of the entire campaign, and even a little bit of Campaign 2. But a character very different as a evil kind of villain when you compare them to, the likes of Vecna or even the Somnovan. Ludinus has, very interesting motivation that, in my opinion, is extremely justified for why he is acting the way that he is acting. While, yes, there are problems, he's definitely not a good person. You can definitely understand his motivation for why he would want to get rid of the gods. Even in his own words that we saw in this episode, he is trying to embody the memory of the people that he knew that lost their lives during the calamity at the hands of the War of the Gods. These people that have very much been forgotten, and their sentiment, their anger at the gods is still very much felt, and it's lived through lewdness. And again, I think that his reasoning, maybe it's wrong, but it is extremely justified, in my opinion, if, take his, as we've seen from the actions of the gods, as to why people would feel this way. Essentially they are pawns in the world of Exandria, pawns in a, forever war between these brethren that are the gods. So it makes sense why he would want to reclaim Exandria for these mortal people, and in his words, reclaim their destiny, as at this point they are just kind of pawns. They are just kind of, small ants that exist essentially at the whims of the gods, and it takes an event like the Calamity to remind people that this is the case. As well, this fight in 118 was relatively underwhelming. It wasn't this big, crazy, epic fight that we saw for the, big bad evil guy, finale fights that we saw in campaigns 1 and 2. While the fight was challenging, they did defeat him relatively easily, and no one really was even close to losing their lives or being lost. It didn't really feel like this big kind of climactic, big bad evil guy fight that the other two campaigns have ended off with, so it does make me wonder exactly how Campaign 3 is going to end. Again, Campaign 3 has been drastically different in terms of pacing, in terms of tone from the other two campaigns. The Campaign 1 being a very, kind of traditional, really kind of traditional story of an unlikely group of heroes overcoming great odds and becoming saviors of a world, of a fantasy world. Campaign 2 focusing a lot more on the kind of politics of Exandria and the war between the Empire and the people of Xhorhas, and kind of how this kind of war and politics and this history plays out with one another, with Campaign 3 being a much bigger, blown back, farther kind of macro picture in terms of the entire story that is being told, and, being a story of the gods, being a story of the creation of Exandria and the Calamity. Because of that, I find it really interesting how Matt and the group are going to ultimately end the story of Campaign 3. Will, Imogen and Fern ultimately succumb to Predathos? Will there be a massive fight against a, Avatar-esque version of Imogen being, piloted by Predathos? Will they manage to seal Predathos away inside of either Imogen or Fern and basically keep it locked away, almost like Jinchuriki-esque, kind of Avatar Naruto-esque, where Predathos is then kind of kept as almost like an insurance policy against the gods should they ever fuck around in the future. The mortals kind of have this insurance policy against them. Either way, something has to be done about Predathos. They can't simply just leave it there for someone else to come and release it, a lewdness that's still most likely alive, or even someone else, as Predathos is going to continue to make Ruidus-born people and try to get released. So then they must either manage to figure out how to shackle it again, possibly again shackle it inside a vessel, i.e. Imogen or Fern, or ultimately destroy it in what would be, imagine the ultimate big bad, evil guy kind of fight at the end of a campaign with the party facing off against this god-killing entity, likely recruiting gods in the process. Because it's Critical Role, because it's D&D, it's impossible to predict the actions of these people and these players, and Matt always has so many twists and turns when it comes into his story, and I imagine seeing the tone of Campaign 3 that we've taken all the way up until this point, that it's not going to end exactly how we think it's going to end. Again, Campaign 3 has had a completely different tone shift from the other campaigns so far, something that I've really been a big fan of, as the world of Exandria and its really deep, interesting lore has been at the forefront of Campaign 3, as well as this idea of kind of, graying morality, this idea, this kind of flipping of the role of the gods in the world on its head. It's something that I found absolutely fascinating, and has been a fun, real kind of interesting journey, especially when you consider, all of the stereotypes that Matt is playing on and turning on their head in terms of how gods and divinity are traditionally viewed in Dungeons & Dragons lore. Not to mention that Exandria has to deal with the fallout of these Ruidian people, the people of Ruidus, who now have access to the world of Exandria. So I imagine that Campaign 4 will probably have a lot of fallout in terms of how the Ruidian people, whether they will be accepted or not accepted, likely both, by the the normal Exandrians, and the future of Exandria now having this new multiple races of people, these kind of refugees in a way, that are looking to start a new life on the Blue Dream. It actually wouldn't shock me if if we see one of our cast members, possibly even more than one, play a Ruidus-born, a Ruidian race in the next campaign. I would actually put money on one of them doing this, most likely Sam or possibly Liam. Regardless, the end of Campaign 3 is going to have a drastic impact on the future of Exandria, Critical Role, Campaign 4, and the future lore of this world, whether it is a removal of gods, an eating of gods, a world without gods, a world with a few less gods, a world where mortals now have a insurance policy against a possible future calamity to keep the gods in check. Either way, whatever happens at the end of Campaign 3 here, I think is going to have drastic impacts for, the world of Exandria, the lore of Exandria as a whole. And again, knowing Matt Mercer, I highly doubt that it's going to just be cut and dry. Like, I don't think that it's going to just be as easy as either Predathos is released or they manage to, quell Predathos. Something is going to happen here. There's going to be some kind of major lore drops. I doubt the gods are just going to sit idly by while, this thing that is a major threat to their existence is in the hands of a couple of ragtag group of mortals in the party Bell's Hells. Overall, I've been a big fan of Campaign 3. A couple of years ago, I released a video called The Problem with Campaign 3. This was relatively early on in Campaign 3, as there was a number of issues with it, most namely the pacing of Campaign 3 at the time. But even back then, I had a lot of hope for this campaign because of just how different it was, how different the tone of the campaign, how different the story that was being told, and all of the twists and turns and really major lore drops that were happening throughout this campaign. I mean, in the span of Campaign 3 with the release of EXU Calamity and EXU Downfall, we've learned so much about the greater narrative and story, the world of Exandria, and there's still so much that we just don't know. I wouldn't be shocked if there's even more lore that gets dropped before this campaign is over. And I also wouldn't be shocked if it turns out that a lot of the lore and information that we've learned over campaigns 1 to 3 has been wrong, and we are in for a shock, an even bigger shock than we've had throughout the course of Campaign 3, when a lot of these stories that we've been told and assumptions we've made about the gods, the creation of Exandria, the Luxem, everything really gets very much turned on its head. And regardless, it does seem like we are closing in on the final few episodes of Campaign 3. It does only seem like there's going to be a few more episodes, possibly 2, maybe 3. There's really no way to predict it. I say this now and watch Campaign 3 go into like episode 130, but I would honestly be surprised if it doesn't end within the next month or two. Either way, now that we're at the end of Campaign 3, I can honestly say that Campaign 3 has surprisingly been possibly my favorite campaign of Critical Role so far, taken as a whole. Obviously, Campaign 1 is amazing and Campaign 2 are amazing, and there are definitely arcs of Campaigns 1 and 2 that I love more than, arcs from Campaign 3, but as a whole, in its entirety, I have been a massive fan of the story that Matt Mercer has wanted to tell in Campaign 3, this amazingly beautiful long-term story, a story that has very much turned the world of Exandria upside down on its head, has flipped so much of what we thought was true about this world and the lore, completely around with crazy lore drops about the gods, their origin story, the calamity, everything. This campaign has very much taken Critical Role in a very interesting direction and definitely flipped a lot of the story and the lore completely on its head. And I have a feeling, again, that whatever happens at the end of Campaign 3, it's going to be absolutely insane. Regardless of what happens, it's almost guaranteed that the end of Campaign 3 is going to have some crazy repercussions and some crazy impact on the future of Exandria, the future of the stories that are being told, the future of Campaign 4 and Critical Role as a whole. And I honestly can't I can't wait to see it. It's gonna be epic. Again, I think that Campaign 3, when it's all said and done here in the next couple of weeks or months, it's going to go down as one of the best Critical Role campaigns of all time. As always, though, guys, with these kinds of videos, these are just my thoughts and opinions, so feel free to let me know yours in the comment section down below. What did you think of Campaign 3, Episode 118? What did you think of the fight with Ludinus? What do you think is going to happen at the end of Critical Role Campaign 3? And what do you think is going to be in store for the future of Campaign 4 and Critical Role as a whole? If you did enjoy this video, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, as that is the easiest way to help support me, and it really does go a long way in helping to put these videos into the algorithm. If you did enjoy this video, then want to check check out some of my many other Critical Role videos on screen now. I've done years of Critical Role content, from like episode breakdowns to theories to just my thoughts on episodes and, you know, kind of topics of with Critical Role and the lore as a whole. So I'm sure if you like Critical Role and you enjoyed this video, you'd probably find something else that you like. Again, thank you so much for continuing to support me and watching this video. I hope to see you in the next one. Until next time, stay safe out there. Peace, love, adu.